All right, welcome to the No Show. My name is Andrea Edwards.
I'm Joe Augustin.
And I suppose I'm Tim Wade. And
I suppose you are.
You've come to the show where you get to know what's going on in the world, updates on key news items, key things that need to be remaining in the headlines. We've got a special guest with us today.
Yes, we have.
Yep, Susanna Hasenoehrl. So Susanna is the sustainability speaker. She is a little bit on the side of awesome. I don't know if you've met Susanna before, but she's great. She speaks with leaders and key influencers, organizations about sustainability. And Susanna, do you want to tell us a little bit more about what you do? Just before you do, I just want to say I've heard Susanna present, and her content is fantastic. Her data is amazing. And what she shares for organizations to be able to implement change within the organization with regards to KPIs on sustainability and real measurabilities is astonishingly good. And if you're a business leader out there or somebody talking to businesses about this, I think you should have a conversation with Susanna as well, because I think her perspective is very, very valuable. Susanna.
Tim, thank you very much for those kind words. So indeed, I'm the sustainability speaker, and I work with business leaders and their teams, helping them to embrace sustainability as part of their strategy and everyday decision making. I also speak at conferences, I provide executive briefings, and also interact with teams in town halls. So always in the interest of greater sustainability, resilience, and climate action as part of our business. Great to be here today.
It's fantastic. It looks like you've been locked out of your castle, or you're just inside.
Yeah, I'm kind of moving in and out still.
That's a fantastic door.
As and when needed. Yeah.
It's a beautiful backdrop.
From a time living somewhere else earlier.
Yep. So the theme of today's show is to talk about greenwashing. Right, we've got some echo going there on somebody's.
Sorry, I was opening up on my many other pages so I could see what's going on. My fault.
Right. All right.
Okay, minus 1 point for Joe. So at the moment, the scores are 0, 0, 0, and minus 1.
Minus 1.
Sorry, back to you, Andrew.
Yeah, so one of the reasons we invited Susanna is because we really wanted to talk about greenwashing. There's been a couple of times I've used the phrase recently, and people have gone, what the hell is that? And it's one of the passion topics for Susanna in all of her topics. So I'm looking forward to getting stuck into that and just really helping people understand what it is and why it's important. So there you go.
Absolutely, yes. Super important topic, my favorite topic.
And if you're watching, it would be great if you could hop in the comments and say hello and keep your comments coming while we're chatting away, as we would love to hear from you and voice out some of those comments as well. And Joe will be keeping an eye on that in order to try and earn back his 1 point that he lost.
Yeah. All right. Should we get stuck into the news that struck a chord this week?
Yeah.
All right. So the news that got my attention this week is the build up to the 20th anniversary of 9/11. Have you guys been reading the stuff that's been circulating?
Right. Not that one.
No? Okay. So, well, you got a lot of catching up to do. And this really links into the Afghanistan news, which is still not out of the headlines, which is a relief. 9/11 is a very significant day, obviously, for America, but it's a significant day around the world. Obviously, there are people who lost loved ones that day, and we're seeing interviews with many of the children at the time who lost their parents and they're now adults. Then there's also the stories, the powerful stories of those who got out by the skin of their teeth. And then there's people like me who actually cancelled a meeting in the World Trade Center at 9 a.m. on 9/11, and I cancelled it the day before and stayed in Boston. And that's always left me feeling very deeply connected to this moment in time. I was very thankful that everybody I knew got out that day, but I know a lot of my friends did lose a lot of people. Most people who are old enough will remember exactly where they were at that moment. Do you guys remember where you were when that news hit? Yeah?
Very clearly, yes.
Where were you?
I was actually in Bangkok. It was an evening. We were having a dinner at a restaurant, and they had this television screen there, and we were aware that something was happening. Something had happened in the U.S., and as we watched the TV screen, the second plane flew into the second tower. It was very traumatic.
Yeah, I think most people got to the coverage just at that moment. Tim and Joe, do you guys remember where you were?
I was doing a show on Tekong. We were doing a show for the recruits, and when we were coming out waiting for the ferry, I'm always listening to the radio, and I heard the bits and pieces of it. And at the time, I was in charge of the radio station, and this was kind of like after hours for the news team, because there's such a thing in our business. But I was in charge of the radio station, so me and someone else got down to trying to report about it, and it was just incredible. It was just growing bigger and bigger, and it got just unbelievably huge. We thought something small happened, and then it got even bigger, and it got to the point, because I was among some very young people at the time. The size of what was happening was so big, they couldn't figure out how to deal with it except through laughing. It wasn't real.
Yeah. It was very shocking. It was shocking for a long time too. I remember it took me about 2 weeks to get out of this stupor. I was always in front of the television, just watching the news and watching it again and again and again. And all of my friends in Boston were doing the same. And we were on the roof looking for the next plane to hit the Prudential, because that was predicted. One of the planes left from Boston, or two of the planes left from Boston. So it was, it was a big moment. Tim, do you remember where you were?
Yep. I was in Melbourne, and I was living in Collingwood, or nearby, on the Yarra, and my fiance was watching the news, and I was in another room, and she just went, "You need to come and have a look at this." And I mean, it was just, we were at home. It was late, and then we saw the second one fly in, and we were just calling out the news to each other as we were running around the house doing stuff. But it was. I guess I was a bit numb. I mean, it was just. I was watching it happening, and it's just like, I don't think the enormity of it had hit me, even though I'm watching this stuff unfold in front of me. Yeah. And I don't know whether that's a desensitization because of violence and stuff that's happening around the world, or even or a selfish apathy on my part. I haven't quite processed that really, but I do know that it impacted us in crazy ways in the weeks that followed, because everybody thought everything was a terrorist attack after that. Yeah. I mean, I flew to Adelaide, and there was this sort of, everyone was a bit worried about airplane hitting a building in Adelaide, and I was just like, nobody's going to attack Adelaide. So yeah. We're taking this out of control. So yeah, there was I was in a 2-story building is where I was working. Not at the time it happened, but that's where I was working. I was in this 2-story building, and we thought we were going to be attacked. I was like, nobody's going to attack a 2-story building. And then we I was managing this whole group of people there, and I was called to the lift where there was some white powder on the glass surface on the side of the lift. There was a bit of white, and everyone was freaking out that it was anthrax. And so we're standing there pointing at it. I mean, if it was anthrax, we're all inhaling it, but we're standing there pointing at it going, it could be anthrax or whatever, and it's a bit like this. And the cleaner walks past, and we're all standing looking at his lift, which he's proudly cleaned. And we're all pointing at this thing, and he just goes, "Oh," and just wipes it with his cloth and walks off. And we're like, "Oh, well, I guess we've solved that then," and we've wandered away. But so in a way, there was this, I guess, remoteness from it, in that we were so far removed. But at the same time, it just changed everything.
Yeah, it did. It really did. And we talked about it in the first No Show, that it was this moment, where the whole world changed, and the fear that was ricocheting around the globe, and the shoe bomber, and we had another plane go down. So I think I was in Mexico by this point, so it was about 4 months after. It was a crazy time, and but it was the beginning of the divisions, not just in America but around the world. It's also the starting point where the populist leaders, sort of the fertile ground, sort of emerged. The inequality has grown since, the suffering has grown since. But across the media, both the left and the right-wing media, which I've been reading both, there's a lot of really deep and thoughtful articles, which I'll include obviously in the weekend reads. And I found that the coverage has been fairly consistent. So where you usually find extreme opposition, a lot of the information that's coming through, is actually pretty similar. So it's worth having a look. I really, it's 20 years after the Afghanistan war has just finished. It's a good time to read it. The terrorists we went to war to defeat are stronger than ever, and every bomb that was dropped created new terrorists. It's a very poignant moment. How can we change paths? Are we going to continue as we've been going for the last 2 decades, or are we going to learn? Because, really what has been achieved? And this is the question a lot of these articles are asking. The news coverage it's discussing all the failures, the decisions that were made in fear, anger and outrage right at the beginning. And that's why it was important you talked about your feelings there, Tim, because we have to remember that that's where people were. They were sitting in very, very, very deep fear, and there was very, very little dissent on both sides of the party. But then there was a lot of arrogance. There was a comment to the Afghanistanis, your history starts now, really completely ignoring the rich history of this magnificent country, but also its more recent wars with countries like Russia. This idea that America was strong enough because it had the mightiest army on earth, it was going to go in there and defeat the terrorists and defeat the Taliban, and it didn't achieve that goal, and it's made those groups stronger. So that sort of really comes through. The bloodlust that was going on at the time, and there was there's many, many quotes of George W. Bush saying that he was experiencing bloodlust during that period, and you've got to say that's not a very good foundation of leadership when it comes to war. The intelligence failures that happened, and this is one of the things that has really improved since. They're all starting to work together, but the reason it happened was because different groups weren't sharing information, not just in America, but around the world. Then there was this rhetoric like you're either with us or against us. And of course, the French said, we're not with you. And French fries were rebranded as freedom fries. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
How far can we go, right? In terms of being ridiculous.
Yeah, exactly. And there was a lot of that.
Did you notice at the time, and certainly in the years after that, that fear became the political campaign agenda across every election that happened? It was about making sure that you were afraid, and who would you trust to lead you through that? And so it was fear and trust, weirdly enough. And campaign slogans were, who do you trust? So in other words, do you trust us to bring you through this as we've been bringing you through it so far? Or do you trust these other guys who haven't done anything, who didn't have to go through this? That's kind of where they were positioning it. And they were making sure that you stayed. Pardon?
A trust also in a very patriarchal way, like, who's got the biggest guns and the army and the intelligence and all of that, rather than maybe some other markers of trust as well.
Well, but
and then again,
in Australia.
Yeah, and then again, you could almost in that environment, pick any opponent and say, now we have to be totally opposed to each other, if not go to war directly, right?
Yeah.
No, yeah, exactly. But I was even thinking of local elections, even. Or Australian elections where we don't have the biggest guns or anything. We've just got the biggest landmass that's hot.
Well, whatever your weapon of choice is, right?
Ours is bushfire.
I'm just hearing this, and I'm a bit worried by that, because I think motivations have always been about fear. I mean, it always has been about fear. I don't think it changed dramatically. But I think the face of fear is what became very clear after that time. There was a reference. I think fear has been used for the longest time, whether it's been used as a mindful tool, or people really believe that and they really feel the fear and they really speak what their truth is, as in they're fearful and therefore they speak and campaign on the basis of fear as well. I just think that after 9/11, what you were afraid of was more common. It became something you could kind of direct yourself to. But I was just thinking back about pre 9/11. There's so many things that happened as well that were all about fear.
Yeah,
sure, yeah. But I think a lot of the campaigning was about fiscal responsibility in Australia. Usually, it was about who's going to make you wealthier, and then it switched to who's going to keep you safe, and who's going to keep our borders safe, and all of that sort of stuff. That was anyway. That was my experience.
Justifying military investment, right? But yeah, another big part of the story that's being told at the moment is the amount of disrespect towards not just the Afghanistanis, but also the perceived disrespect in the Middle East, right? And obviously Guantanamo Bay is a big part of that story. And, you know, the Bush administration justified and lawyered the laws and the Geneva Convention to justify what they were doing in Guantanamo Bay. But this was one of the issues that the Middle East could not tolerate. And it's a big part of the problem that emerged. And the reason that America could never win is because of those things. Their credibility as the good guy, and my country is part of that. England's part of that.
Wow!
It couldn't recover.
Have I gone off, or have I lost everybody?
No, we're still here. You there?
Okay.
All right. Yeah. So, I mean, the damage was really done, and there were some other incidents that lost, just the lack of respect towards the Afghanistanis. And, there's so much more, but, when you think about what did we achieve in that 20 years, and I say we because I come from a country that was part of it, trillions spent, thousands of lives lost, the Taliban are back in power, the fear is on the ground, it's still on the ground, they're still talking about the risk of terrorism in the future. And then you go and look at more news this week, so the new Taliban government's been announced. And then from a female perspective, which is obviously an area I'm focusing on, the good news is the women can still get an education, but they can only be taught by women or old men of good character. So that was the news this week. Oh, and classes have got to finish 5 minutes early so that the women and the male students don't interact with each other. Also, women can't play sport in Afghanistan, so I'm glad that the Australian government got the Olympic and the female sports stars out of the country. But, when you get to the end of it, you've got to wonder about, this whole sorry affair. Is it enough of a lesson for us to have learnt to change our paths? If you want to understand, there's a couple of really good pieces. One is Afghanistan was a Ponzi scheme sold to the American public. And the other one was 9/11 was a test. The books of the last 2 decades show how America failed. So they're two really, really great articles. If you're not a reader, the other place that I would recommend is a series called The Turning Point on Netflix. It looks at Afghanistan, Iraq, the Taliban, the politics of the moment. And if you just want to get a full sort of 20-year view, but also prior to that time beginning, it's a really great show to watch. So, yeah, some very thoughtful, heartfelt pieces, and I would definitely recommend, if you're interested in understanding this moment, what's being shared right now is meaningful and it matters, and it's an opportunity for us to learn so we don't continue doing the same stupid things over and over again.
Yeah, always learn from history, right?
Well, you'd hope so, right?
You talked about the journey a while ago, and it made me think about it and go like, I don't know how many people realize they are on that journey. When you're in the middle of it, I sometimes you don't know where you're heading. You just are moving along with what seems to be the momentum of the day, or momentum of the time. I just was thinking about that, as in like we're thinking about how people have to think about where they are, or think about the journey that they're on. And I think for many people, because they don't look around to think about that, or they're preoccupied with so many other things, the existence of the journey itself fades away. You're the fish in water who isn't aware of water.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's quite easy to get drawn into certain pathways in our lives, professional or otherwise, because certain incentive structures kind of keep pushing you certain ways, and more often than not, it takes a bit of a crisis to gain distance from that, whether voluntarily or involuntarily, and to actually to be able to gain that distance and look at things a bit more holistically and in a more balanced way than if you're part of the system and in that stream.
Yeah. No, I mean, I agree with Joe that the ability to see the bigger picture really does help you to understand. We talk about the arc of history, and a lot of people, they live in the moment, and when you're in the moment, the emotions are high. If you're only paying attention to the crises, you're sitting in a place of heightened emotion. But if you can look at it from a big picture perspective, you go back into history, you think about what it really means in the future. Will it matter in 5 years' time? Those sort of questions. It helps you to step back from the emotion. And as we saw with the reaction and the response to 9/11, I think if the government was able to get beyond the emotion, they might have been able to start looking at a more sensible way of approaching it and getting the revenge that they required without putting themselves into an unwinnable war, and now sort of licking their wounds and trying to work out what they did wrong and how they could do it better. So let's hope we learn.
Well, I hate to introduce a metaphor that might confuse, but I do trading, and I don't know whether you've done any kind of trading before, looking at candlesticks and what have you. But when you're trading and you're trading what they call a smaller time frame, you can get caught up in what you see in that moment. You can see the trends moving in this direction or that and this and the other. And as you were talking about this thing about taking that worldview, it really is something that we do, or I try to do and remind myself to do when I'm trading, which is to go out and step out of that small time frame and look at the bigger thing that's happening. But I also realize that even though I'm trained for that, and even though I'm looking out for that in the moment as it's happening, I don't. You're right about the emotional aspect. You are driven by that. You're driven not only by the emotions of your emotions in that moment. Because we're social, we're driven by the emotions of the people around us as well. You're not going to take that, are you? No, I'm not. What? Okay, and then you end up doing something, and it feels right in the moment as well, because socially, it's all around you. It's what should happen.
Yeah, I like
the fear
that.
of missing out, right?
Yeah.
Join the queue, join the emotion.
All right, shall we move into COVID? So a lot going on. So just in case you don't know, we have passed 224 million coronavirus cases worldwide, and officially 4.6 million deaths. They expect that with excess deaths to be at least double. But a report was released this week that shows definitive proof that masks work, which is good after 19 months. The really concerning story that sort of jumped out at me is the one with the Aboriginal community in Australia. Infections are breaking out in remote communities. And of course, this is a community that does not trust the white man medicine for very, very, very good reason. And the medical infrastructure in these communities is often appalling. The fact that Delta is out in the regional communities of Australia, if you know Australia, it's a big, big, wide country. I think it's a devastating turn of events. And especially, a lot of the elderly people in Australia live in these sort of communities. So there's a lot of anxiety and fear in regional Australia, which I don't blame them for feeling that way. In Singapore, the Delta variant outbreak is threatening its living with COVID goals. So I'm sure you guys living in Singapore are getting ready for what's next. India has seen a 14% spike in cases just in the last week. But with it, vaccinations accelerating across the country, we've all got to hope that we don't see the catastrophe that we saw earlier this year. Unfortunately, the World Health Organization has forecasted that there will be 25% fewer COVID vaccines available for the world than earlier thought. And there's a lot of reasons behind this, and factory breakdowns and stuff, but this is devastating news for the poorest countries in the world. I mean, I'm in a place where people still haven't got their first round of vaccines, so it's very difficult. Joe Biden today announced, I'm sure you guys have seen this, a mandate that if you're a business of 100 or more employees, especially federal contractors to federal consultants, that type of thing, they have mandatory vaccination or will have to face weekly testing. This is obviously going to cause a huge ruckus and pushback, but based on what we were talking about last week with achieving consensus, when we don't achieve consensus of the best way forward, the day is going to come when the heavy hand of government is going to come down. And so that's happening. So that's just a breaking story that I am expecting to scale up this week. So that's kind of the roundup of what's going on around COVID. Anything else you guys have been noticing? Or how do you feel in Singapore with what's going on?
Actually, I've got an idea. It's a stupid idea, but it's a good one. It's a good, stupid idea. And that is, when everybody gets together to protest the mandatory ones, you send in a crop duster and you just drop an inhalable vaccine on everybody protesting and you're good. How about that? Then it's airborne. It's an airborne vaccine. Is that going to work?
I'm sure there's some startup working on that kind of idea. That sounds very effective.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're working at it. It's like called Trample. I think the website is called trampletherights.com or something like that.
Well, actually, you can have big balloons and they can have a gas inside. I think I got this from Batman.
Right, nice.
Sounds like
anyway,
that.
There is a Nordic country that's working on a vaccine which is in powder form, or it's just basically you ingest it. I'm sure it's not a sniffing thing. That wouldn't be appropriate, right?
Well, they'll just leave it. They'll just leave it in tables on tables in clubs with straws next to them.
Yeah, you're right. That's how we get them all.
From my perspective here in Singapore, I think it's interesting to see now whether we really will live with COVID or not. So what's the level of tolerance here? 400 plus cases being a record as of yesterday. Interesting times. I think it always comes down to the amount of hospitalizations, right? And that's always the key point is if the hospitals are overwhelmed, it doesn't just impact people who've got COVID, but obviously all other conditions that need serious attention, especially ICU attention. So high vaccination rates, you've got to hope that if it does break out, it's not going to end up in devastation. And you guys haven't really experienced it. Every neighbor of Singapore is experiencing this devastation. You guys haven't really experienced this yet, so I hope you don't.
Well, the question now is, what do we do after this point? At this point, when you have this high vaccination rate, you're going to have some statistical truths, right? One of it is going to be almost all new infections are going to be people who have either been vaccinated. I mean, it's always going to be either vaccinated or not, but the proportion that are vaccinated is going to be higher all the time. And someone asked the question, are we at the point right now, if you talk about living with it and opening it up, are we at the point we go you know what, you've had your chance to decide what to do. Now you've decided not to be vaccinated. Now we expose everybody to the true risks of it. Or are we holding everybody back because we don't want to expose everyone to the true risk of it? Because at this point, because of the rate of vaccination and because of everything else, in that population, the test, the mathematical test or the modeling already kind of is happening. As we return to normal, we're seeing what the numbers are. We're seeing the level of infection, and we're seeing the level of what we call mild disease or less than serious disease amongst the vaccinated. There is a case, although not easily supported by ethics, to just open up and go okay, we've got that 80% now. We know that it's transmissible even if you have a vaccination, but it's a lesser likelihood that you're going to get seriously ill from that. So we actually have the numbers now, and someone mentioned this to me, but it has to be verified. But in Singapore, the numbers have come to the point where we are very much neck and neck with the flu in terms of if you get COVID, statistically speaking, you are as likely or as much in danger as if you got the flu.
Now that the vaccines happened, the statistics have sort of matched up. Is that right? Or based on the amount of deaths?
Getting to the point, we're spending so much time and resources on dealing with COVID and COVID stuff. that we have it so much under control that the what previously was the less important thing, the flu, is now, I think, showing up in terms of numbers very, very, very close in terms of what like we talk about people who have complications from flu and passing on as well. I mean, because our COVID numbers are so low, flu and COVID are close runners with each other now.
Well,
actually, if I remember correctly, flu kills about 5,000 people in Singapore yearly, like pre-COVID times. I think it's less now because of better hygiene and masks and all that. But it's been said that that's been silently tolerated as a death rate. What's our take on that now in this new era that we're living? What's tolerated, what's not? That's the question, right?
The flu argument's been put out there right from the beginning, right? So countries that have low death rates like Singapore, people would say, but we've only lost this many people. But then you go to countries that haven't taken COVID seriously, and the death rate is 10 times higher than the flu. So if this argument is with vaccination rates so high, the death rate is down to about the same as the flu, then that absolutely makes sense. And I think in the coming months, we'll see what Singapore does, and if it's the country that takes the chance. But Singapore will always watch Israel, and Israel's going through a new round of COVID, right? So I think that's potentially going to influence their reactions, but they're not as far away from the first rounds of vaccines, whereas the Israelis were one of the first countries to do it. So,
I'm actually very
interesting.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm actually very excited about, curious about the next days. I mean, who knows what happens in a couple of months' time, but, will Singapore continue to tolerate the rates? What will be the infection rates in the next days? A lot of debates, I'm sure, amongst the decision makers.
Yeah.
Well, we're at 664 cases today that are in wards, in hospital wards. 26 require oxygen and 7 are in the ICU. Across the country, 81% of the total population have been vaccinated, which, if you account for about 500,000 people aged 12 and under, takes that percentage higher to those who can be vaccinated, who are vaccinated, if I understand the numbers correctly. So it depends on what their number is, because really, I mean, the government has to be in a position, which is a great position to hold, which is every death is one too many, and how do we maintain that while at the same time, right now the balance seems to be, when do we release, like Joe was saying, when do we release it, because people are starting to get hurt mentally and financially from a business side. I mean, they've been hurt for a while, but the longer this continues, the worse that's going to get. And so that's now coming into play in a big deal. So when I did some numbers, I was just responding to somebody's Facebook post, and I just went in and did some numbers on it. And I'll find that post in a little while and try and explain those numbers too. But we're close to the 90s as far as I can see, from those who can be vaccinated, who are vaccinated, but it still is a huge number of people who could get seriously ill. And if that number goes huge, those huge number of people are going to be a real burden on that is unvaccinated people who require significant treatment, will be a burden on the hospital system, which is the biggest challenge. I think that's probably going to be the biggest challenge. But being very extraordinarily selfish, and I hate saying this in front of both Andrea and Susanna, because both of you.
Oh, you're okay with me being here? Okay, fine.
Completely okay with you, Joe. But these other two, they're the ones that are going to probably beat me up for this. But I'm going on a cruise ship tomorrow on Monday, and
holiday to nowhere.
A holiday to nowhere, which uses less. It has less emissions. I don't know, but the
we can greenwash those later.
Yeah, we can greenwash. This is greenwashing. and I just, I don't want to be confined to my suite. It just sounds so selfish.
First world problems, right?
If anything locks down and we can't see the shows and all that sort of stuff, it was just like, damn it. But I will still go. I will still go this time because I did postpone one before when it happened. I don't think they're going to do it unless it gets, maybe if it goes over 1,000 or something, they might start to do something. I would be surprised because I think the pressure on the government is to not be flippity floppity, is to say this is what we're going to do.
Yeah, I think what's been happening, and something speaking about that flippity floppity thing, is that people have been making that comment about what's been happening in terms of decisions, and I find it hugely unfair. I mean, partly because I have so much exposure to the efforts behind the scenes of what COVID is about. It is changing. That policy doesn't occur without the interaction of the audience. So you can put out a policy, you can hope that they're going to go, and the audience or the population is going to comply or follow it. But what happens in real life is just it's not in your control. I mean, one of the things that drives me mad about the whole vaccination thing is people don't know what it means to be vaccinated. They don't know what it means in terms of what it does then convey you. They feel like it's making you immune, and it feels like they don't have to do the things they usually do. So I've been walking around being very aware of people letting their guard down, people touching everything. In terms of even social distancing, I went to buy lunch the other day for the family, and the social distancing wasn't happening, and I was in the middle of a hospital. That's the thing that's happening now. People are letting their guard down because I'm vaccinated, you're vaccinated, we are all vaccinated, but they feel that is the excuse to be less vigilant. And I think the numbers reflect that. I think the numbers definitely are something to do with that.
But then again, if we keep carrying the sense of fear all the time, anywhere, with all of us, that's going to have an impact on our health as well. So I'm not saying we should let our guard down, but and there are reasonable measures in place, but let's just stick to them and then not worry too much, because that will also kill us. Yeah.
When you look at the history of plagues, there's always a point where everyone lets their guard down because they've had enough, and we've hit that point, And I suppose the question is, will Singapore step forward into this unknown future? Well, and we'll wait and see. I know a lot of the other countries in this part of the world aren't ready, even closely ready. Bangkok looks like it's going to reopen in November, so cases are coming down in Thailand, but Malaysia has been hammered the whole time. Looking at what's going on in India, America, Israel, we're coming up to winter in Europe. What's going to happen? So we've got a lot of uncertainty ahead. But if everyone could get their mindset around a 2-year cycle, that will really, really help. If you can just say, I got to get through 2 years where my life's not going to be anywhere near normal. Well, how can I participate in my world? Focus on what you can control. Don't worry about what you can't control. And let's just try and move forward in our best way possible. It's not going to go away. It's not going to go away overnight. We know that. We've got some complications ahead, but take care of your mindset, But if you're constantly in a state of panic, like Susanna was saying, and fear, you're just going to struggle even more. It's because it is here and it's not going to change anytime soon, right?
I wonder whether we're letting our guard down because we're seeing, football stadiums full of people over in Europe, and we're thinking, what's going on? And then I was just on.
But no one's asking the question, what's going on after that, and finding out the answers, right? So we see that, and I see that, and I found out that after they've had one of these things, they have thousands of new cases that come out directly from that one event.
Really?
And
yeah.
So that's.
Let's try to, use our brain. I mean, obviously going into stadium with thousands of people who are not vaccinated, without masks, it's generally speaking not the best idea. So what's going to happen? I mean, maybe we can detach that euphoric sensation. Oh, I want to be there. I want to live for a moment and say, okay, well, maybe it isn't such a good idea after all, and kind of be happy in relatively safety for a little while.
Well, I wonder if that's causing us to relax a little bit. By the way, I am going to a football stadium on Sunday to watch a football match here in Singapore. But you always have to, even my wife and I have to sit one seat apart with a spare seat in between.
Wasn't that pre-COVID as well?
Yeah, well, there's only 27. Yeah, that's true. Well, that's her preference, though. But here's the other thing. I was on a Zoom call just before this, and a friend of mine is flying to the UK for I think it's a business trip, and the flight is packed. It's not one seat in between and you can lie down the whole thing for yourself anymore. The flight apparently is packed. She was surprised because when they booked it in July or something, it was all, economy is business class now. But now it's apparently full, which I was very surprised to hear. I thought the airlines were still quite spacing everybody out and talking about sort of how everybody's walking around in a spacesuit and everything. So I was a bit surprised by that. But there was one other thing I wanted to mention, and we're talking about the psychology side. And I noticed with this cruise coming up, my psychology shifted a little bit, and it shifted a little bit from because of COVID. So I don't know whether you've booked a vacation before in the past where just before that vacation you weren't feeling great. And you went, well, I'm freaking going on this vacation anyway. And you get on the plane and you fly over, even if you're sick, and you go into the thing and you just, get better after a few days or whatever it is. And then you're not even sick. You just go. And with this cruise thing, first of all, there's two things that I noticed. One is I'm a bit paranoid about going into any public place because I'm getting my swab test tomorrow. And then there's another one the other day, and I just don't want anything to get us thrown off the boat, right? But at the same token, I don't want to go on the boat and get sick. Like, that is, I don't want to be the one that, first of all, I don't want to be the one that gets everybody else sick. And I would rather be here if I have got something to be able to get through it and that weather. But that would never have been the case in the past, where I would just go, well, I bought the ticket, I'm not moving the holiday, I've got my annual leave, I got all this sort of stuff, the family's ready to go, I'm meeting other people over there, everything's booked, and I can't get my money back if I'm sick, or I can if it's insured, whatever it is. It's changed a little bit. Maybe it's the flexibility has changed, but it's maybe it's I don't know what it is, but I feel like I'm resigned to being at home, but okay with that collective decision. Maybe it's a bit more collectivism coming into play. And that is, I'm more concerned about, infecting somebody that can't handle it, which wasn't the case pre-COVID, if that made sense. I wasn't even thinking about some old lady on the plane or on a boat or whatever it was. I was thinking more about me and my holiday plans.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah, I think maybe we've woken up to a little bit more of our collective impact on each other. All right. How about we move on to the climate news as our next category? Because we can talk, can't we? Here's some highlights. So a big report this week. 200 health journals came together for the first time to call for urgent action on the climate crisis. And it's to keep global warming below 1.5 degrees, to halt the destruction of nature, and to protect health. When we get to 1.5 degrees, large parts of the Earth will be too hot to live. So it's really, really critical that we address this. And of course, if we keep going the way we're going to hit 1.5 degrees in the next few years. But it's not going to be permanently embedded as 1.5 for a little bit longer than that. But we really have no time to lose. Another report from the Amazon, two-thirds of species have lost habitat to fire and deforestation. The worst deforestation in the Amazon's history has happened in the last few years, and during COVID, it's been even worse. Some good news out of Australia. Western Australia has said by 2024, all logging of native forests will stop, which is great. The other one out of Australia was that the long-nosed, hairy-nosed wombat is back from the brink of extinction, which I thought was lovely. Wombats are awesome.
They're awesome. Square poos.
Joe Biden, obviously, earlier in this week, after the shocking events of the week before, stated the climate crisis is here. We need to be much better prepared. We need to act. So the whole getting ready to deal with it conversation, the subways in New York aren't ready for that, to deal with those sort of floods. Whereas if you go to Singapore, like Tim said, the stairs go up before they go down, those sort of things. A cool story, and this is something I've been paying attention for a while. There's a band called Massive Attack. I'm sure my kids like it. Anyway, they have been collecting gig data to measure the emissions of live concerts, and they're sharing the results with bands all over the world, encouraging them all to clean up their act. And I find it really inspiring stuff, but it's also the sort of collective action that all industries need to commit to. Australia has been warned by the UN officials that the climate crisis is going to wreak havoc on the economy, and there's a lot more of this coming out against Australia, especially if coal isn't phased out. Australia was one of the countries that could have made the move to renewables before anybody else. It's ripe for this sort of thing, but investors are increasingly abandoning fossil fuel investments, but we'll talk about that in a minute. But there was another piece on Sky News, which of all places surprised me, about a shady trade deal between the UK and Australia, where Australia is insisting the emissions targets that are linked to the Paris Climate Agreement are removed from this deal. And obviously with COP26 coming up, this is not a great thing for the UK image. So I've got a friend called Robert Karubi. He tagged me on that piece of news. Billions of dollars are pouring into businesses with promise of decarbonisation. So Joe, if you want to invest your money, this is the place to do it. And in Iceland, there was this story yesterday, I think. A machine has been turned on, and in 1 year, it extracts enough carbon to counter out 870 cars. So that's 4,000 tons of carbon dioxide per year. We currently have 30 billion tons of carbon dioxide in the environment, so we are definitely going to need a lot more machines. But the real message here is technology will not be our savior. It's going to be a part of it, but it can't be the whole. And too much of what I'm seeing looking forward is about relying on technology rather than changing how we live and work as a global society. And the final piece in the climate news is the most vulnerable nations on Earth are calling for a global pact to deal with reducing global warming. And this group are also struggling to actually be able to afford to get to Scotland for COP26. So the people who didn't cause the crisis may not even have the chance to stand on the platforms to talk about the crisis because of funding. So that's the climate news this week. Anything else you guys have been noticing?
Well, I read the article you sent around from the New Yorker, and when you put this headline up, the climate crisis, what's new? I was going to chime in and say, according to the article, nothing for the last 20 years. So thanks for that depressing read.
Did you find it depressing?
Well, I found it in a sense that it was talking about where we are and how it's all done for, and we just have to change the way we look at stuff. I disagreed with the idea that nothing can be done because I think it didn't factor in enough of what technology will do. Like you mentioned the machine you spoke about a while ago, and you said technology itself won't change it, but scaling might. So if we can figure out how, for instance, this kind of technology can scale, how do we find it? How do we resource it? How do we kickstarter it? How do we whatever? How do we figure out a way for us to employ and deploy and scale technology so it has a greater impact? It'd be fantastic. I think the status quo in terms of what if we assume that technology is where it is and behavior is where it is and how people behave is where it is, you're right. It's going to be hard to turn the boat around. But I think there is room for something that will happen, that can happen, a safe nuclear-powered, carbon-extracting, ice cream-making machine, something that could be fun as well as save the planet,
I track a lot of perspectives, obviously, on the climate crisis, and I don't share a lot of the doom and gloom stuff. There's one guy that reckons that humans will be extinct by 2025, and a lot of people don't agree with that. But for me, this article, which was basically saying there is no hope, but actually when you got stuck into the article, there is a lot of hope. And it's about all of us stepping into that hope and saying, okay, I'm going to do this bit. And collectively, I'm going to organize my community, or I'm going to plant a garden, and I'm going to eat vegetarian food. And if everybody does it, then it's not going to, we can't, the message, we're trying to save the planet. No, we're not trying to save the planet. We're trying to save our ability to live on the planet.
Yeah.
That's what we're trying to save, right? The planet will go on in various forms, as it always has. It's our ability to live on the planet that we're looking to save. And what our opportunity now is, how much worse are we willing to allow it to get? Because once we get over 2 degrees, the runaway, if we allow it to get past 2 degrees, that, most of the people are saying we're on a runaway collision course with nature, because if we're that stupid that we don't stop it before it gets well before that, then we're not going to be able to stop it. So it was actually, there's a lot more hope in that article than I think it started with.
I think the only positive thing about this, recent, catastrophic events on the northern hemisphere summer, floods and heat waves and fires, is that unfortunately more people are affected by it, but also more people are understanding or experiencing what climate change means now. It's not some distant thing. It's happening right now in our lives. And if nothing else, my hope is that this will mobilize more support for reasonable measures to counteract that.
Yeah.
And by the way, just to add on, by the way, I can be very certain the world is not going to end by 2025, because I have a loan with DBS which carries on to at least 2032. So,
well, they can still exhume you and ask you for the money.
Yeah, exactly.
My challenge to what you said, Andrea, is I think the solution is technological. I don't think the solution is everybody changing their ways. While everybody changing their ways would be a good solution, I don't think it's going to happen. If we can't get people to wear masks, we're not going to get them to change everything else that they do, with regards to what they eat, how they travel, what emissions that they do, calculating this, planting gardens. I can see a percentage of people who are aware making changes so that they're not hypocritical, but there's this giant iceberg of people who are either unaware or not going to change. And it seems to me that the only way that the solution is going to happen is if it's commercially viable, profitable somewhere, and automatic, that will cover the fact that we don't know what that people are not going to do it unless, like Susanna said, they're feeling it. When they feel it, their awareness is now peaked a little bit. And I'd love to hear some of Susanna's corporate ideas and solutions, because I think companies are a big one in determining how people think. Because to force people to make changes, government would be seen as tyrannical, and then the government that comes in as opposition to go, why don't we not do that? And everyone goes, yeah, we like you better, we're going to vote you in. So then the other lot get voted out, even though they're trying to do the right thing. Whereas organizations can operate across national boundaries and make a difference if they choose to, although profitability is a bigger thing there. Mm-hmm. And then other thing I'd just like to throw in before you do that is, how do we export power, like wind power and that sort of, how do we export it? Because the thing about coal is you can put it on a ship and send it to somebody else. And we're exporting the power. Apart from having a giant tanker battery that then sails over somewhere else and then unloads the battery or charges something and it comes back and powers up again. So that
there's a lot of stuff that you've just said that will be very difficult to answer within the time frame that we're working on here. But like
a quick one maybe.
For
me, I think change of human habits and patterns is obviously very difficult, perhaps the most difficult thing there is. But I do think that businesses and corporations have the opportunity to continue offering us products and services that we experience in a similar way, but which just comes with a way lower environmental footprint. That's the change that needs to happen. That's the innovation space. So I don't believe that there's like one single silver bullet that will magically improve everything. On the contrary, lots of companies will need to innovate very hard and change the products and services that they offer to us, so that we can consume more responsibly. So that I see rather as the pathway, rather than a silver bullet technology, a singular one, or sadly changing our habits.
Yeah, and the idea that what we create needs to be profitable. That's the reason we're here in the first place, right? That the only things that we do we're doing because we can make money from them, right? But there's a global education program that is in place, and it needs to get bigger, and we need more voices talking and more ripples going out into our communities and more awareness of our own personal habits and like if I waste something, I feel this incredible sense of shame, and I want everyone on the planet to feel this sense of shame in themselves when they do something that's not good for the environment. And that's just all of us coming together and doing everything we can to sort of raise awareness. But one of the things that we want to talk about, and that's our theme this week, is greenwashing. And this is one of Susanna's passion topics, like I said earlier. But just this week, Susanna, EcoBusiness published an article about a report that's stating that ESG investment funds are rife with greenwashing. And for those of you who don't know what ESG stands for, it's environmental, social, and governance. It's a generic term used in capital markets and by investors to evaluate corporate behavior and determine the future financial performance of companies. So it's a hot topic. It's a growing area. Lots of jobs available in the area. But Susanna, let's start by defining what is greenwashing.
Well, greenwashing could be considered as a form of misleading marketing or any other communications that portrayed a company or a product. It could also be a financial product as something better compared to alternatives. So better in terms of environmental, social, or human rights issues without the proper evidence to back that claim. Yeah. In other words, greenwashers talk loudly about sustainability without actually doing anything.
Yeah.
So
okay.
The reason why this exists is that there is a willingness and there is a demand for products and services like this. And currently, a lot of businesses and companies are getting away by not actually showing any real evidence or proof that they're actually doing anything differently, but by clever marketing tactics, because we prefer to buy such products and services. This gives all the fuel to greenwashing to happen in many, many different areas.
Yeah. All right. So let's get stuck into some examples. So just a little while ago, I was reading an article about this. I think it could have been Shell. I can't remember, but they were doing a campaign around green coal, and all of their branding was green. You go into the supermarkets, all the packaging is green, right? So let's talk through some examples of some of the most outrageous greenwashing that you've seen.
Yeah, well, one case that was actually brought to in front of the advertising watchdog in the Netherlands recently was involving Shell. So in the Netherlands, Shell is running a campaign where they say, hey, try emission free if you do this carbon offset. Now, a group of young students have contested that and make the case that Shell hasn't provided any evidence to support that claim. Now, if you look into the mechanisms that Shell has probably used here, well, they are probably buying carbon credits which do help reduce the emission load on the world. And surprisingly, there are lots of carbon credits out there. So you can buy a ton of CO2 emissions for about $5. However, it's quite questionable what's the quality of such a carbon credit. So is that really an additional effort to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in the world? How long would such a reduction last? So if you look at the other markets where companies are forced to buy carbon credits because they are regulated and mandated for doing so, there the prices are at about $75 in Europe right now. So you can think of what's causing this 15 times price difference between a $5 carbon credit and a higher quality $75 carbon credit. So this is something Shell will need to answer, I think, within a week. And then we shall see whether they can continue with this campaign or not.
Yeah, if I was Captain Shell, I would simply answer, because we're not locked in, we're not mandated to do it, we're not getting ripped off. That's what it sounds like. But I totally agree with you that there are different types of carbon credits out there, and some of them are for things that have been made 5 years ago, and because they're producing they're climate positive producing areas, that you can buy credits from it, and it sort of offsets what you're doing. The challenge is, like you said, it's not actually adding something new to solve the problem that we're creating now. It's paying for something that's already running.
That's right.
When I was doing some research about what to do, I found this dam in this hydroelectric dam in South America that was built in 1974, and they added some hydroelectric thing onto it that gave me the opportunity to buy these credits from it. And I was just like, but it's already built it. So
that's right.
It's already doing its good thing. I want to be able to do a new good thing, so that what I'm doing is incrementally adding to the solution rather than just paying for somebody else's infrastructure.
Yeah, absolutely. And now, obviously, with the increased bushfires in US and many other places in the world over the summer, we're faced with the problem of permanency. So a lot of the additional forestation project have actually burned up. So the permanency topic is another relevant one in this case that Shell will need to account for.
At least they've got charcoal.
One of the companies that really came out early was BlackRock, claiming that they're gonna get green. And earlier this year there was some outrage. I think the headline was BlackRock accused of greenwashing $85 billion in coal investments. And then in March, one of their executives basically came out and said, in truth, sustainable investing boils down to little more than marketing hype, PR spin, and disingenuous promises from the investment community. So it sounds like, everything that we're hearing on that side is just rubbish, which means, how do people know what to trust? I mean, because it's not just the investment side, it's the fossil fuel industry. They're relying on future growth because the plastic companies, the consumer goods companies like Coke are just going to make more and more bottles of plastic. How do people know? How do you pick it?
Well, indeed, I think right now we are approaching a watershed moment in the ESG investment area. Sorry, there's a bit of background noise.
It's BlackRock calling.
Yeah, they were listening. Very good. But actually, the Securities and Exchange Commission in the US has started to investigate DWS, and a German asset management company, for allegedly kind of making a bit stronger sustainability statements about their portfolio than what is actually or supposedly being the case. So I had the pleasure of being in a session with Desiree Fixler, who was the former chief sustainability officer there, and she shared about what's the practice or the lack of practice of actually validating certain investment objects, ESG and how that was communicated externally. And there seems to be quite a discrepancy in terms of what's being put forward as the methods and practice versus what happened behind the scenes. So I think the whole investment community is really on their tiptoes, because it's certainly not just DWS that's, I think, facing similar challenges in doing this kind of business. So it could well be that this becomes a precedence case that spills over from US to Europe and other parts of the world. Certainly, there is a lot of cleanup to be done in the marketing of financial products. Yeah. It's very easy to say, this is environmentally friendly ESG integrated. It actually doesn't mean anything, really, if you ask me. It's just someone has maybe thought of thinking about ESG in the context of a product, but it's quite different from ESG performance to start with. And having spoken to many financial advisors here in Singapore as well, I think it's fair to say that there is quite a lack of depth in these conversations here. So again, it's up to us as consumers and professionals to call out when we get this kind of marketing messages from financial institutions and advisors, and not to accept them such. I really advise everyone to ask quite pertinently what's behind those sustainability claims or ESG claims that have been made. In the best case, you get an honest answer, which is, I don't know. I've also received that many times. But, don't buy such products at face value. Really ask and do your research whether there is any substance and proof behind the sustainability claims.
Yeah, and it's not just the financial services industry that's part of this greenwashing. The consumer goods industry is part of it. The automotive industry is part of it. With all sorts of cases, claiming that cars were practically emissions free and they weren't. It's every industry, and of course the onus is on the consumer again to educate themselves. So follow Susanna; she shares a lot of really, really great information on this. I put it in my weekend reads as well if these articles pop up. But the other thing I would say is, I'm a PR, content marketing person from over 20-year history. Susanna, you come from a similar industry, similar background. To the people working in this industry, don't contribute to this rubbish. Just please challenge your company. Some of the biggest damage that's been done has been through the marketing and PR arms of the fossil fuel industry. So I think the people who are working in this field, and not everybody in this field is bad, don't get me wrong, and I think a lot of people thought they were doing great work. It was exciting work, right? They were changing the narrative. But the impact on Earth is obviously something that we all need to be aware of. So if you're in this industry, let's stand up and let's change the course. As a community, I think we're a powerful community, and we can do that.
And still talking about emotions, I mean, I think the emotion that's been marketed quite heavily is guilt. By the fossil fuel industry. Oh yeah. It's been shown that the concept of a personal carbon footprint was actually kind of conceptualized and put forward by a PR agency of a major fossil fuel company to divert the attention from systemic change to putting the guilt on us as individuals. So this is a marketing strategy that's being used over the last decade. So whereas I think it's fine to be conscious of the footprint that we have. I mean, again, if we're not presented with better economically available and convenient choices, then it is a systemic issue, and we should challenge the system.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm interested in how some of these big brands have actually changed their logo to look environmentally friendly. Like, isn't BP's a flower?
Something like that, yeah.
Shell is Shell, of course. Standard Chartered just changed theirs to have a water droplet and a leaf. Well, what looks like a water droplet and a leaf. And I just, as you were talking, I was wondering, I wonder what sort of coal stuff do Standard Chartered sort of finance? And I just typed it into Google. And came up with this website called Here for Coal instead of Here for Good, which is their tagline. It was hereforcoal.com. and the whole website is calling Standard Chartered out against their no coal policy and examining how much funding they're putting into coal and how it's continuing.
There's actually another great website. I don't remember the name right now, but they pretty much disclose all the, I think, top 200 world's banks, fossil fuel exposure in terms of lending. It's quite interesting reading and definitely something that should guide your decision when you choose your bank or consider switching. And then you saw the things like the Adani mine in Australia, right? So the final insurer that was looking at getting on board was Lloyd's. And I remember, and I don't know if you guys understand how Lloyd's work. I only do because I did some work with them. But it's a marketplace, right? So they don't actually have central control over the marketplace. And if people want to go and insure a mine in Australia, they will. However, it was the first time that Lloyd's did sort of do a call down and say, we can't support this. So, you know, there is change. There are significant things happening. It just needs to happen faster. But greenwashing, keep an eye out for it. Keep an eye out for the articles. Subscribe to the eco magazines and digital newspapers that are out there. There's some brilliant ones out there. I love Eco Business. Spend some money with them to help them keep going because they're doing really important work. But yeah, once again, the education is on us. But if you're not one of those people that can be bothered, then let's make sure the people who can be bothered are sharing that knowledge with their communities so that we can get the word out. All right, so should we move into the other news that's catching our attention this week? Have you guys got any funny ones?
Yeah, I got a great one.
Awesome.
So there's a boy giant panda has been born in Singapore Zoo. And the reason why it's important that it's a boy is because they're looking for a name for the panda, and it is you've got till September the 19th to submit the name. So I came up with a name just now, and I think we should call it Pandemic. But I don't know whether
and the mic.
Yeah, like Mick. Yeah, Pandemic. I think that'd be a great name, don't you think? You heard it here. We've got this on broadcast.
I love that we have a brand new giant baby panda that's been born.
The other name I think would be good is Quarter Panda with Cheese.
You're all class.
No, good. Go back to Pandemic.
It's a whopper of a name. Yeah.
Is there a greenwashing one? Panda. Nope. Bamboo. Right. Okay.
Joe, have you got any news you've been paying attention to?
This week has been a little bit distracting for me in terms of cryptocurrencies. You know what's been going on. So there was a flash crash.
Oh yeah,
there was a flash crash that happened. Just the other day. Basically,
that was my fault, by the way, Joe.
Yeah.
And that was the same day or same week that one of the countries in Latin America has pegged its entire currency to it, right?
Well, what else? One of the reasons that they talk about the crash maybe happening was because all of it was building up to this, and then when they launched the apps that were supposed to run it didn't quite work, so it really opened to great failure, so to speak. It may have caused a little bit of automatic selling as well, because everybody is a bit on the edge and tense about that price because we've just hit some new highs, so everyone's just on the edge there. And so something like that can really cause an avalanche of sorts.
It's not that it's because I bought some.
That will be it. Yeah,
it always crashes. I predict every crash.
Did you guys see the women's protests in Afghanistan? And the ladies are saying that they're going to keep protesting no matter what, even if they die. And I'm watching these protests and talk about uncommon courage. These women are incredible. And I'm just constantly thinking, what can we do to support the women and the girls of Afghanistan, as well as the LGBTIQ community there, and just the minority communities. What can we do? Yeah. Uncommon courage. Thanks very much, Tim.
No problem.
Another story that I thought was interesting was that Mexico has decriminalized abortion. And they've done it in the state, in a northern border with Texas, which is kind of ironic. but it's actually also expected to become a national ruling. So obviously, as a predominantly Catholic country, this is a big deal. The only countries in the world that have gone backwards with abortion are the US, Nicaragua, and Poland. So, there's some really interesting commentary about that as well. Any other news you guys picked up? Nothing? No, just Bitcoin. There's another really cool story this week in Mexico. A 7.1 magnitude earthquake struck near Acapulco. Did you see that? So a lot of damage, not too much death that I've seen so far, but it created a lot of surprise, awe, because it released blue lights, and this is called earthquake lights. And basically, I've never heard of this happening before, but it's a common thing. It's energy being released during a tremor. So there's some really fantastic visuals, photography, and videos around this moment when these blue lights are released. So go and check that one out too.
You got some links for us?
Of course I have in my weekend reads. Come on.
Lovely. The other thing that is important news at the moment is Kim Jong-un is looking trim and tanned.
Excellent.
Yep, just thought to let you know.
Good. Well, I think he should be trim at the moment because his country is starving.
It's on headline news. I mean, I don't know what headlines I'm reading, but these are. This was the headline: North Korea's Kim Jong-un is trim, tanned, and loving a parade.
Oh wow! And that's a country in deep crisis. All right. So first of all, thank you so much to Susanna for joining us. Please, I do encourage you to follow what Susanna's doing. She's a great thinker in this space, not just greenwashing, but sustainability, especially from a business context. And I'm totally with her on system change. But Susanna, are you watching or reading or listening to anything at the moment that's taking your mind off the world and all the stuff, the crazy stuff's going on?
One interesting thing that I'm kind of starting to dig deeper is an ESG analytics platform. So I've got the data from 66,000 companies now in my hands, and I'm going to be studying that very carefully and also providing feedback to the provider of this system and in terms of where I see room for improvement. Spotted a few things already. I'll take a bit of a deep dive into that space the next week.
So you got some relaxing times coming up then, huh?
Yeah, lots of crunching and charge and whatnot to come. Yeah.
Nice.
Hey, Andrea, do you want to do a shout out for that podcast that features Susanna with regards to the ideas for climate stuff? Because there's some cool stuff coming up on that too.
Oh, you can do a shout out if you like.
Yeah, but okay, everyone can do a shout out. Joe can't do a shout out.
I heard it's a really good podcast.
Thanks for the shout out.
So obviously I put the no show straight up onto Uncommon Courage as soon as I can download it and upload and do all the nonsense you have to do. But we just Tim, Susanna, and our friend Michelle just did a podcast where we're talking about all of the different things we can do as individuals, but also collective activism. So working together as communities to create change. And we're going to do another one in a couple of weeks which is still on the individual. And then we're going to move into business. And then I'm going to find some people in the travel and tourism sector to talk about it from that perspective as well. So that's coming up, and the first one's out. So that's an hour and a half, but there's a lot of goodness in that and a lot of really good ideas that every single person can act on. So check out Uncommon Courage, the podcast. All right, Joe, are you still listening to your podcast or have you moved on to something new?
Well, I had a thought, and I'm sorry I know you kind of headed for the exit there, but I had a thought about the whole greenwashing idea. Okay. And I was thinking to myself that, while we give everyone a really hard time for not doing it absolutely right, I don't want to see us get to a place where people don't want to touch it because it's so dangerous or it's a kind of a third rail situation. And I see that from the computing side of things. Like, for instance, for a while in computing, the buzzwords were AI, machine learning. And then every company that came up and had to talk about computing, they had to have some AI and machine learning sort of component to it. And of course, it turned out a lot of people didn't really understand what AI and machine learning were. They were just using algorithms, right? And it got to a point where people then say, okay, you know what? Let's not do that. Let's not try and do that because that's not what we're doing. I think there is some value to a bunch of people saying they're doing something, even if they don't really know what they're doing yet, because I think it becomes a social norm. It becomes something where more will be done inadvertently, as in like it becomes this fashion that has to move forward. And it's terrible to talk about things in terms of a fashion, but it really is. A lot of times it is about things becoming fashionable. So like wokeness, for instance. I think there's a certain level of the true activists at the base level, and then it caught on, and then it gets momentum and it moves forward despite some people who really maybe don't know what they're doing. So it was just a thought that I had about that. How do we figure a way to say to companies, you know what, nice try, but here's how you do better, rather than bad boy, you know?
Yeah, I think the guilt never works, right? But we have to come to an agreement where this is the moment in time where we stop looking back and blaming, because the damage is already done, and we look forward and solve it together. And there's no bullshit from now on, right? So it's just, I think we have to have a line. And to me, that line has already been crossed. And so just no more rubbish, no more nonsense, no more PR, marketing spin. Just let's be truthful. Let's be honest. We've got a problem. We need to solve it. We need to come together and solve it. So let's go. And any nonsense from now on, inexcusable.
No,
we have to agree, right?
Yeah. No bullocks, right, Andrea? Yeah.
Yeah. Because we know, they know, everyone knows. Let's go.
Okay,
Absolutely.
That's the end of my U-turn. I'll put you back on course again as I U-turn back out to the exit.
So what are you watching? What fun stuff are you watching to escape? I mean, Susanna's escaping with a 60,000 disaster report. What are you escaping with, Joe?
I will be very ironic. I am watching Homeland, and it's the timing of it. You know, they're in Afghanistan right now.
Right.
Yeah.
Wow.
Season 3.
I got through halfway through the second season. I just couldn't do it anymore. It was too 24 hours again. It was too American again. It's the same old. That sort of, I can't do model. What's the word? Everything starts to feel the same. What's that?
Cookie cutters. Yeah.
Yeah. On TV, everywhere.
Like templated stuff.
So you're template. So if you got into season 3, good for you.
Yeah, I'm gonna recommend you do plow on. A lot of the shows that suffer from that kind of thing. You got to get past the middle of season 2. But it's one of those shows. So right now I'm at 3, moving on to the 4th one. It's evolving. And actually, one of the key parts of that show, which people do miss, is that it's about mental health. A lot of the show is about mental health. A lot of the characters, we follow them that way. So it's the hidden agenda wrapped around, or at least wrapped around with a terrorist plot.
You guys need some lessons in escapism. This is not freaking escapism. So I'm watching Only Murders in the Building, written by Steve Martin, with Martin Short, who is hysterical in it, and it's I can't stand it. It's on Disney Channel. I can't stand I have to wait a week for the new episode to drop. I'm accustomed to being able to binge, and when new things are coming up like this, it's just like, come on! But it's beautifully made in such a way that it's very funny. Its writing is very funny. It's about these 2 old guys and a young girl who decide to make a podcast, and who one guy's been an actor in TV and the other one's been a Broadway producer, and they've all had their sort of identity losses, but they've decided to make a podcast on this murder that happened in their building. And then they were like, can we make a podcast about all these other murders? And it's like, no, only Murders in the Building, hence the title. And it's very good. I think we've got about 4 episodes down so far, but it takes you into their building. It's just, I don't know what it is, but it's kind of, I don't know. I'm laughing out loud. And I usually smirk for something that's funny, but this one gets me laughing.
Yeah, we watched Dirty Grandpa with Lex, our 14-year-old, on the weekend. That's Robert De Niro, and that's a pretty funny movie. But one of the series we started watching this week is called Untold Stories on Netflix. And if you have an opportunity to watch it, it's brilliant. It's really so the first one we watched was with Caitlyn Jenner, so her entire story was absolutely fantastic, and I think it's going to do a lot to help people like trans people. There was another one about a female boxer, so with an abusive husband, controlling husband, who also finally accepted that she was a lesbian and lived her life fully. So really powerful. So I would definitely recommend Untold Stories.
There is one on my watch list that is from the National Geographic Channel called Genius, and it's like biographies of. They've got 3 seasons out, and each season's one person. So it's like a mini series on just that person. The first one's Jeffrey Rush playing Einstein. Jeffrey Rush is one of my favorite actors. He's just brilliant. So it's almost like if he's doing it, then that's good. So there's Einstein's the first one, Picasso's the second, and the third season's Aretha Franklin.
Okay, well, that sounds great.
So that one looks pretty interesting. That's in there. I think that's Disney Channel as well, but if it's Nat Geo, then it could be anywhere.
Yeah. Well, Nat Geo is on Disney.
It's on Disney, but is it on somewhere else as well? Possibly.
I don't know. Yeah.
They're all taking their things off their different platforms and putting them onto their own channels and charging. So
yep,
we have multiple platforms. All right, so time to say happy weekend. Thank you so much for joining us, Susanna.
My pleasure. Thank you.
My lovely male partners in crime for the No Show. I hope you find some use in this and just sort of catching up on what's going on. I put this straight up onto Uncommon Courage, the podcast. So if you prefer the audio, that's another way of listening to it. Tim and Joe, do you want to wrap up?
Well, I'm going to recommend the podcast because that's a fantastic way to enjoy us without our faces. Well, at least I speak for Tim and myself.
Bye, everybody. Thanks for joining us again. We look forward to seeing you next week on the No Show. Do catch up. Do connect with Susanna, especially if you're running business and you need some KPIs involved, like I mentioned at the start of the show, because she's got some really interesting ways of finding that out and helping you set that stuff up. So have a conversation with her about that as well. Andrea, always a pleasure. Joe, less of a pleasure, but I'll tolerate you.
All right, guys. Ending the broadcast. See you next week.
Love you lots. Bye.
Bye-bye.